Okay, so before we start, you should know that this episode is not necessarily about motorcycles. But we are talking with Peter Egan again, one of the greatest motorcycle writers of all time. Still with me? Great, because while you may know Peter Egan as the prolific journalist from Cycle World and Road and Track, you probably don't know that Peter's also an aviation buff. So much so that he got his pilot's license back in 1982 and then took a 6-week trip around the United States with his wife Barb a few years later in a 1945 Piper Cub. Just Google it or picture a small, bright yellow plane. That epic trip now lives forever in Peter's new book, Landings in America. A travelogue meets memoir, which documents his adventures to small-town airstrips across the country with a tent, a change of clothes, a wad of cash, and a battery-powered radio. Yeah, no GPS, no cell phones, not even air conditioning. So while Peter's trip was up in the sky, his trademark approachable writing style mixed with his great sense of adventure and exploration makes you feel like you're there with him. And you'll also realize that flying and motorcycling share quite a few similarities. Like, for example, Peter Egan declaring they're both romantic ways to travel. So whether you're on the ground or in the air, a great adventure is a great adventure. This is Peter Egan again. I'm your host, Mark Long, and you're listening to Driven to Ride. All right, Peter Egan, you are back on Driven to Ride for the second time. Thank you so much for letting me invite myself up to your workshop again.
Well, thanks again for driving all the way up from Illinois, way down south from here.
Yeah, right, exactly. And
deep south.
Only got honked at a few times for the Illinois plate. So.
Oh yeah. Well, you have to put up with that.
Yeah. I made it through here just fine. Good. Excited to get some spotted cow on my way home as well.
Good. Stop in New Glarus and fill up. That's the big brewery over there.
The trunk is empty.
Okay, good.
But we're not here to talk about beer. We're actually here to talk about your latest book, Landings in America, which, just so we're aware, is not like a motorcycle book, right?
No, it's not. I mentioned motorcycles once or twice in there, but there are very few motorcycles in the book.
Okay, so we can call it an aviation travel book with a couple of motorcycle mentions.
Yes.
Let's just to catch up real quick. What do people most know you for, kind of in your own words, or what is kind of your claim to fame?
Probably longevity, because I worked for Road and Track and Cycle World for about 43 years. So if you are interested in cars or bikes and subscribe to one of those two magazines, you probably eventually notice that I was writing something for them all the time. And
yeah, your column is called Leanings.
Yes.
Was in the Cycle World. Did you have a column name in Road and Track as well?
Yes, it was Side Glances.
That's right. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. But I think aside from those two, you are a boat guy and obviously a plane guy.
Yeah, I like, I think of it as romantic modes of travel, or difficult or uncomfortable modes of travel. But I like sailing. Barb and I have had a couple sailboats, and we used to go up sailing on the Great Lakes, and not anymore, but we used to keep a boat up in Door County and go up there for the weekend. And we're both pilots. We aren't current right now. We haven't flown for a few years. But when we lived in California and I was working for the two magazines, I finally had enough income to think about taking flying lessons.
Sure.
And,
it's not cheap.
No, it's gotten more. It wasn't bad then, really, relative to what it is now. But I took flying lessons, and Barb and I both signed up for a ground school. It was 4 nights a week for about 5 weeks, several hours at Orange Coast College. And Barb originally signed up just so she could learn about navigation and radio and understand what was going on with the airplane. And then she really got hooked. And halfway through, she said, as soon as you get your license, I'm going to start flying and get mine. So right after I got my license in about 1982, Barb started, and several months later, she got her pilot's license.
Wow. So that had to have been pretty exciting to have somebody go from just wanting to navigate and be kind of a second in command to a full-on co-pilot.
Yeah. Well, Barb is very adventurous, and she loves motorcycles too. In fact, she had a motorcycle when we met in college.
No way.
She had a Wards Benelli 125.
Okay.
And so she was riding that to class and so on. It's always kind of funny because people occasionally at a party or something will say, I can't believe your wife lets you ride motorcycles.
Right.
And I always say, I can't believe she lets me ride a motorcycle.
Yeah, it sounds like a keeper
somehow
to
we
me.
put up with each other.
Yeah. Sounds like a keeper to me, man. That's a lot of cool adventures. So let's kind of take it from the beginning a little bit. What even first got you into aviation in the first place?
When I was a kid, I think the first mechanical thing I was really interested in was airplanes.
Okay.
And a typical 10-year-old, I was making models of everything. I had balsa wood models and plastic models, and I had them hang from my ceiling in my bedroom. I read Spirit of St. Louis by Charles Lindbergh, and then the movie came to the movie theater, and I saw Spirit of St. Louis, and I had to read every book on aviation I could find. And so I've always been interested in airplanes, and I was actually probably interested in airplanes quite a bit before I really got into the car and motorcycle thing. That hit when I was maybe 12 or 13.
Okay.
Because I got into that through the go-kart and mini bike craze, and I built my own go-kart and mini bike. And pretty soon I was reading Cycle World magazine and Cycle and Road and Track. I built a couple of go-karts and modified the engines and that kind of thing. So all of a sudden I was really smitten with the motorcycle and car world.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like you just any kind of, like you said, kind of transportation.
Yeah,
romantic or otherwise, you have a fascination with.
Yeah, I just I like the idea of traveling with some sort of vehicle that makes it more interesting to be traveling. For instance, I like sailing, I think, because it's more work than driving a motorboat. It's more interesting. You have to be putting up with the weather and paying attention and that kind of thing. I think flying and motorcycling are probably more similar to each other than either one is to driving a car.
Okay.
Because you're out in the weather, especially in a Piper Cub with the door folded down, the window open. You're in the wind.
Yeah.
And you can feel the temperature outside. You're in the weather.
Yeah.
And you're dependent on the weather for your comfort and safety. There's sort of similar type things. It's really motorcycling is just flying on the ground for me. It's
yeah, it's a good analogy. Well, we'll get into that in a minute, but first, let's talk about landings in America a little bit.
Sure.
Can you kind of set the scene, maybe give a brief synopsis, how you started this adventure?
Well, Barb and I, as I said, we both got our pilot's licenses, and we were renting airplanes for a while, Cessnas and a couple of Pipers. But I always wanted to buy an airplane, and I've really been in love with the design of the Piper Cub and several other antique airplanes, Stearman's also. But I always wanted one. I always admired them when I was in high school. I worked at an airport one summer, and I just liked Cubs. So we looked for a used one and bought one, and found we got a good deal on this airplane. It was an aerial photographer in Orange County named George Sandy had bought it as a pile of parts. It was somebody's abandoned project, and he finished it and put it together.
Oh, cool! Yeah.
So it had already been covered and everything with fabric. And so we got it for $8,500, and then we moved it out to Corona, California, to a smaller airport from Orange County. But I've always wanted to fly around the U.S. low and slow and see the country from 1,500 feet above the land.
Yeah.
And so Barb and I both saved up 6 weeks of vacation at our respective jobs. She's a physical therapist and was working at a hospital. Mm-hmm. And I was working for Road and Track and Cycle World, and I had to get ahead on some of my writing, my columns and so on. Yeah. But they were very nice about it and gave me a little extra time off. So we took off from Corona in 1987 in the summer and flew for 6 weeks around the U.S. And we left California. We didn't fly all the way around. We didn't circumnavigate the whole continent or anything. Mm-hmm. We flew down to Florida to see my dad, across the Southwest and Texas and Louisiana and around the Gulf.
Sure.
And then we went up the East Coast on the Outer Banks as far as Kitty Hawk and landed at First Flight Airport where the Wright brothers
First in
flew.
Flight, yeah.
And then we cut diagonally up the James River and headed to Lock Haven, Pennsylvania, where the Cub was built. And we just happened to be doing this trip on the 50th anniversary of the Piper Cub, so there's a big fly-in there, and we tried to time it so we would end up there on the week of the fly-in. And luckily, the Cub stayed running, and we didn't have any bad luck and got there in time to be there for that.
So just to not to jump ahead real quick, but are plane people, like especially like in a meetup like that, like motorcycle people in a meetup?
Oh yes, yeah. They're all. I think I said somewhere in the book that it was just amazing to land and suddenly find yourself surrounded by 300 other yellow Piper Cubs. I said it was like sort of like being an Eskimo in New York and walking into a bar and finding it full of Eskimos. You know, it was
Right.
it was just odd to see all these Piper Cubs in one place because we hardly seen another one crossing the country.
Yeah, because you mentioned like, and it's on the cover as well. It's that big bright yellow.
Yeah.
It's not a big plane. It's not
No.
a powerful plane, and I believe yours is a 1945.
Yeah, it's a 45. It was built for the Army originally as a grasshopper, they called it in World War II. It was a scouting plane, and they also used them as an air ambulance who could carry one person in a stretcher. It had a turtle deck back window, and so you could slide a stretcher in.
Yeah.
And they used them for artillery spotting and the usual, just like bird dogs are now, you know, in the Army or the Air Force.
Yeah.
And so it was built for the Army at the end of World War II, and it never got used in combat or sent overseas. When the war ended, I think it was sitting in Lockhaven. But it was all these surplus airplanes that were still there had already been paid for, I think, by the government. And so they sold them off to government agencies. And ours went to a Shoshone Indian reservation in Northern California.
Okay.
And they used it, I'm sure, as an ambulance or to get to remote ranches and so on, to have an airplane available. And then sometime during the 50s, it got converted to civilian colors. They recovered it or repainted it, so it was no longer olive drab, and it made the bright yellow Cub. And then when I looked through the old airplane logs, it had been used by many people to give instruction and teach flying and so on.
Yeah, that was this is one of the more popular planes for like training and instruction.
Yeah, it was probably the most popular trainer. It was really made to be an affordable airplane for people who didn't have a lot of money. This, came out during the Depression. So they were trying to have an airplane available for people who want to learn to fly and couldn't afford a deluxe cabin cruiser of some kind. But it had two seats and one in front of the other, tandem seating.
Oh, okay.
And
Sure.
Only a 65 horsepower engine. So top speed is about 70 miles an hour. And in that era, they didn't have any mixture control. So just like a motorcycle, when you're going up a mountain, it gets richer and richer in the carburation.
Yep.
So by the time you get to 7,000 feet, it's really done climbing and it's not running very well.
Sure.
But they really fly best under 3,000 feet.
Okay.
So we had to do a lot of circling and swooping to get through mountain passes in the Rockies. And a couple of them we just barely had enough altitude to get through.
Yeah, because that was your big challenge really at the start, right? Is to go from California to get east. You have to go over the Rockies somewhere.
Yeah, and we discovered that El Paso was well named. It never occurred to me that El Paso was called that because it's the lowest pass in that part in the southern Rockies.
Sure, yeah.
And that was the old Pioneer Trail.
Okay,
So they could get through without being snowed on or climbing forever. So we've essentially followed I-10 on that part of the South to get through the Rockies.
So did you, when you were planning this trip and all that kind of stuff, obviously Barb had her license. So did you have to convince her to take this trip or?
No, I didn't. She was behind it all the way. She liked the idea. She likes adventures, and I wrote in the book that Barb was always surprising me on our anniversary. One year she signed us up for a 10,000-foot skydiving free fall and a hot air balloon ride. So she liked to try things like this, and so she. I felt bad a couple of times when things got a little tense in the mountains that I had. Maybe if she wasn't married to me, she wouldn't be in this antique airplane in this unfortunate place in the mountains.
Right.
But she was fine with it and did a lot of the flying, so it worked out well.
Yeah, I read a little bit that she did a fair amount of flying as well, obviously because she has her license. So
Sure.
you guys are able to trade off a little bit.
Yeah, that helped a lot. I carried a small pocket tape recorder in my pocket, and I also had a notebook that I carried on the plane. And so I would talk into the tape recorder so I could remember what we were seeing. When you're flying over the mountains or through different valleys, at the end of the day, it's hard to remember exactly where you were and what you saw.
Yeah.
And so I would make notes on the tape recorder or write something down quickly. And then when we got to a motel or camp that night, I would sit probably for an hour or two and write everything out longhand in my logbook or
cool.
my notebook.
Yeah, because just to make sure we set the scene even more, is that no GPS,
No,
cell phones,
no.
no VOR, I think.
They had VOR available, but the Piper Cub doesn't have an electrical system, so it has no built-in radios.
Yeah.
So you couldn't install a VOR radio unless you put an electrical system or had a really heavy battery, perhaps. But we had a handheld radio.
Okay.
And 2 sets of headphones, just a system, we could talk to each other.
Right, an intercom system. Yeah.
And so the intercom worked really well. It was a very sensitive intercom. We could talk to each other almost whispering, even with all the outside noise.
Hear each other breathing and stuff in your ears.
Yeah. So that was handy because we could actually understand what the other person was saying without having to shout.
Nice, yeah. Well, and so you're using maps, like analog paper maps.
Yeah.
You're maybe using a compass.
We had a compass in the airplane, and just as we were taking off from Corona to leave on our trip, and all of our friends are there waving and filming us taking off, Barb pointed out that the compass was off about 4 or 5 degrees. So I handed her this little screwdriver we have to make a fine adjustment. And so just before we took off, she took the screwdriver to adjust the compass. And something went twang, in the compass, and it broke internally and started just spinning around. And so we sat there wondering if we should take off with no compass. And I hated to wait for another day and go looking for a compass and tell our friends to all go home. And I said, we're following the roads anyway from here to Palm Springs. We can probably pick one up in Palm Springs. We got there and it turned out no small airport has a compass for sale. They figure most people don't need one.
Right, yeah.
And, so we got all the way to Florida without a working compass.
I mean, yeah, you follow the roads and we follow the sun.
Yeah, we follow rivers, roads, and railroads.
Nice.
And we had the typical Rand McNally road maps, and then we had FAA charts, which are very good. They show all of the elevation and information and airport information, radio frequencies and all of that. So we had that to go with.
So you mentioned a small airport in Palm Springs. You really only landed in small airports though, right? That was by design?
Yeah, we tried to. I didn't want to land at big airports because we weren't really well equipped radio-wise. We didn't have a lot of spare radio time on our battery every day. We had to charge it. And whenever we could, we landed at a small town where we could walk or hitchhike into town, look for a motel.
Yeah.
And we like small airports, small grass strips, small paved strips. And some of the bigger airports we landed at Longview, Texas, which was a big airport, because it was a Sunday and all the small airports were closed and we needed fuel.
Oh, okay, yeah.
And so we landed there. And occasionally we had to do that to get fuel or just because it was on the way or it was time to land.
From necessity, yeah.
But most of them were small town airports. So.
Well, that sounds like that was kind of the goal, was really to see America for the small towns and what it really is, right?
Yeah. Yeah, we used to call big cities yellow zones because if you look on an FAA map, cities are in yellow. Like Los Angeles is one huge yellow blob that covers most of Southern California.
Sure, right.
And so we tried to stay away from the big yellow places like Phoenix area.
Sure.
We flew around Phoenix rather than go, because there are usually multiple airports and lots of traffic, and it's just a lot easier to go around them and land at someplace smaller.
Yeah. And so to kind of keep going around the route, we talked about going through Texas, Louisiana, and you stopped in Florida, right?
Yeah, my parents had moved to Florida in 1971.
Okay.
Right after Barb and I got married, right after I got out of the Army and came home from Vietnam. But my mother had died a few years earlier, and my dad was still living there in Boca Raton, Florida, in a condo. And he had moved, actually, he'd sold their house in Boca and moved to Delray Beach. And so we landed at Boca Raton Airport and met my dad. And then we spent almost a week with my dad, taking him around and going to the beach and the usual out to dinner, the usual things.
Just a more romantic way of getting there.
And then we just flew all the way up the coast as far as Kitty Hawk, stuck to the coastline all the way up the East Coast.
Yeah, I saw, I think, a couple of photos of that you had taken, like doing the Outer Banks and stuff like that, like right on the coast. That had to have been like super cool to see all the beach and the ocean and stuff and be flying that close to it.
Yeah, the Outer Banks are beautiful to fly over. And when you're in a small plane like a Cub, they're very reassuring because it's one long landing strip. I mean, you can always land safely in a sand dune or something, as opposed to a forest or or a big city, with factories.
Much like the Wright brothers, right?
Yes, exactly.
So then continuing up, you went to Lock Haven.
Yes.
And then you came over west and went all the way far up to Eagle River, I think,
yes,
right?
we did. We came to Madison, this area, and we had and still have a lot of friends here.
Sure.
We had known. And then we went up to Eagle River in northern Wisconsin to see Barb's parents. They had a house on a lake up there, a retirement home.
Very cool.
And then we came back to Madison and flew more or less diagonally back to California.
And then came back the same way west under
El
Paso.
we had to go all the way down. We couldn't go straight across diagonally. We had to go down to Interstate 10 again, go through El Paso.
Yeah.
So we went down to Ozona, Texas, and then followed 10 through the mountains.
And you, I believe I read you flew almost like every day, maybe except for that weekend in Florida.
We did. We really got in the habit of flying all the time. It's, I guess it's like being on a motorcycle trip. You're used to being on the bike.
Yeah.
And you don't really want to spend more days just hanging around and shopping and looking at things. And it's time to get back on the bike. And it was time to get back on the airplane. We're just used to going every day.
Right. Yeah. So kind of used to that momentum a little bit. Yeah. Well, speaking of that, I mean, how is flying across the country similar and or different to taking like, a motorcycle trip?
I think it's closer to motorcycling than taking a car is, because especially in an airplane like the Piper Cub, it's almost like taking a small displacement motorcycle. You aren't traveling really fast, so you have time to look around. We were doing about 300 miles a day, which is kind of a conservative distance if you're on a motorcycle back road trip. And you're in the wind, and you're very much aware of the weather, because if it's hot out, you're really hot, and the wind is blowing. If it's raining, you want to land. You don't want to. You'd rather not fly in the rain if possible, especially a thunderstorm.
Yikes! Did you encounter any of those?
Oh yes. We in the South we encountered what we called the 3 o'clock thunderstorm. We had about 4 days when exactly at 3 o'clock the clouds would billow up and it would start rain. We'd see lightning everywhere and it'd start raining.
Yeah, and you're a little closer to the lightning than you are.
Oh yeah. So we would try to get up very early and leave as soon as it was legally possible to fly, a half an hour before sunrise, and then we would usually land about 3 or 3:30 in the afternoon, depending on the weather. And we were usually pretty tired by then and worn out from the heat. And it was a hot summer.
Yeah.
If you're motorcycling on a really hot day, at the end of the day, it really feels like it's time to find a motel that's air conditioned and take a shower and cool down.
Yeah.
And go to an air conditioned restaurant and have a drink.
Right.
And,
yeah. Exactly. You've earned it. Yeah.
Flying was the same way. We were really kind of tired and burned out at the end of the day. And so on a lot of the trip, we really didn't use our tent. I think we only camped a couple of times. And because we would just land, and as soon as the propeller would stop turning, we'd realize it was about 10 degrees hotter than we thought. And we're already pretty well baked.
Yeah,
so we would say, let's get to a motel quick and turn the air on and clean up.
Yeah. Well, speaking of the tent, in the description, it's a tent,
yes,
a wad of cash, and a change of clothes.
That's about it.
Is that really all you guys brought?
Yeah. We had only 20 pounds of allowable luggage.
Space. Together or separate?
Together.
So
for
10
both
pounds
of us, including
each,
a toolkit. And so, that BMW over there has a saddlebag that holds more than we were able to carry. I was
going to say, you carry more on a bike than you on a plane.
Oh, by 3 times as much on a motorcycle. So we each just had essentially a change of underwear and socks and a pair of shorts to wear while we're washing our blue jeans in a laundromat, one T-shirt and an overshirt like this, just in case it. And when we took off, we had our leather flying jackets as well for cooler weather. But once we got through the mountains, we really didn't need jackets at all. We mailed those home.
Right.
It's just more weight to get rid of.
Yeah, I mean, if you're in the middle of summer, I mean, even Eagle River, Wisconsin can get pretty toasty in the summer. So.
It was a hot summer.
Sounds kind of similar to taking a C-100 to Iowa.
Yes. Yeah, remarkably similar. It's a little faster.
Sure.
65 miles an hour instead of 35, but it's not quite the same type of adventure as a real. I would say the Cub is more like taking a 350 or a 400 cc motorcycle on a cross country trip. It's kind of that pace. You're moving, but you aren't going very fast.
Yeah. Well, I think another similarity has to be, like on a motorcycle, you notice things on the road that you don't when you're in a car.
Yes.
So you're seeing everything from such a different angle. You probably notice things from the sky that you wouldn't notice in the car, because you can see kind of the zoomed out view or the 1,500 foot view for that.
Yeah,
matter.
yeah.
So that would have been kind of cool.
I write about that in the book a little bit about how easy it is to appraise a town when you fly over a small town. You can see if they have a nice park, if they have a functioning main street.
Oh, sure.
If they've got a nice school. And you can see towns that aren't doing well. There's dying. There are a lot of small towns dying out on the Great Plains and so on. The people are just moving away and not coming back.
Yeah.
And you can spot those from the air, and you can see a town that's thriving pretty quickly. And I said if you're ever thinking of moving to a small town, it wouldn't hurt to fly a Piper Cub over and see how many stores, gas stations, parks, a swimming pool, the houses. You can see everything pretty quickly from the air.
Yeah, and talking about the book a little bit more, it's more than just kind of a travel log, as it were. I mean, it's kind of an observation of America kind of at that time. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, at the time we did the trip, I was thinking of writing a book as soon as we got home.
Oh, no way. Okay.
So when we got back to California from the trip, I spent a couple of weeks typing out all my notes, and I had about 110 pages of typed notes.
Wow.
And a lot of pictures and all the maps. And I had saved all the Time magazines that arrived while we were gone, so I'd know what was going on.
Yeah, historical context, yeah.
And I got very busy going back to work again. I was working about 6 days a week between the two magazines. And I just didn't have the energy to start working on a book on Sunday, the one day off.
Yeah.
And so I put everything in a box and said, well, eventually I'll find time to work on this. And I never got back to it. And then a couple of years ago, Barb said, you really need to finish that Piper Cub thing. You've got all this information.
Yeah.
And so it turned out, when I was planning to write it when we got home, it was going to be essentially just a travelogue. We took a trip and here's what happened. But with 35 years or 34 years going by, all of a sudden it became more retrospective for me. Sure. And more of a memoir, because my dad is gone. A lot of the people who visited are no longer with us. And Barb's parents were gone by the time I wrote the book. And so I'm writing about the trip as a travelogue, but I'm also looking back. And we went a lot of places that reminded both of us of having been there when we were children and what happened and what our parents were doing at the time.
Sure, yeah.
So I hope there aren't too many flashbacks for the average reader into our family lives and what we're doing. And so there's more of that, and there's a little bit of 70s or 80s context too, as far as what was going on. The country was still healing a bit from the war in Vietnam.
Okay.
And so there were a lot of reminders. I was visiting people I had known in the Army, and so there are a few flashbacks on that era too.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, if you think about it, it was only 12 years after the end of Vietnam, so that's not, I mean, in the terms of historical context, it's not the longest time.
Not much, no.
So, and a kind of view overall of what, America kind of was like then. So, kind of looking back at all that now, do you think you could take the same journey in 2025?
I think you could if you were 34 years old again, or 38 or whatever we were at the time.
Sure,
and, I don't have the energy to do it now and spend those long, hot hours in the airplane, and I'm not sure I would qualify for a medical anymore to get my license.
Okay.
But I think if somebody that age wanted to do it, there would be absolutely no problem. I think a lot of the airports are still there. The aviation scene is lively. Oshkosh gets thousands of people every year,
sure.
And at the fly-in. And we have local fly-ins that do very well. And so I think there's still a lot of interest in aviation. And if you had an interesting airplane, you could do exactly the same trip.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure it would be that different in the small towns. When I was writing the book, I I was able to use the internet, of course, and Google Earth and see what happened to some of these towns that looked like they weren't doing well. And I was surprised how many of them have come up in the world since then. Surprisingly, they have more industry now than they did in 1987. More housing, more nice houses, more stores on Main Street.
Sure, that's cool.
So a lot of places have actually made a comeback from being in kind of a lull when we were on the trip. So that was nice to see.
Yeah. Were there any spots along the way where maybe that you had like ridden that road or like ridden that journey like around Louisiana? Like I know you went down to New Orleans and documented that.
Yeah.
In leanings when you kind of flew over that, we're like, oh, like this is kind of cool to see.
Yeah, it was nice to see it. I've made a couple of motorcycle trips down the Mississippi to New Orleans, and I've gotten to know the area pretty well. I'm a big blues fan, music fan, so I've managed to put together a number of motorcycle and car trips where I had to explore the Mississippi Delta and go down to New Orleans and hear music and enjoy the food. But we were several places that I had stopped at before. For instance, in New Orleans, we stayed at the same hotel I had stayed at in a trip during the 70s on my 400F Honda, the first place I stayed. And I love New Orleans, so it's always fun to go down there. But we always try to stay at that same place, the Cornstalk Hotel. So yeah, it was fun to see some of those areas, and it's also just even flying around here in Wisconsin. It was nice to see some of the roads I had been riding motorcycles on.
Yeah, see your own home state from a different angle. So.
My own hometown.
Yeah. And again, in the description in the book, and there's kind of a hint towards moving away from the big cities and kind of finding your own little slice of or corner of the earth, as it were. Were you already thinking about moving back to Wisconsin at that point, and was there kind of a bit of that in this trip?
We were. We were in California for 10 years, and it was a dream job. I mean, I loved working there, and we made a lot of friends, but I just got so worn out with the traffic and with the constant growth. We were doing a lot of photo shoots, and we would go on a road where we used to take pictures of cars or motorcycles, and they were now all built up. And,
sure.
Riverside Raceway closed. It became a big shopping center. And so I was watching this encroachment, and the traffic was getting worse every year on the 405 and 5 freeways.
Yeah.
And I got stuck in traffic a lot the last couple of years, and I just got really worn out with it. And finally I said, I've just got to go somewhere less overheated as far as population and traffic. And so we were thinking about Wisconsin, but I thought the Cub would be a chance to also look at other parts of the country and think about, do we want to go back to Wisconsin? Will we find some place in the South we like? And we had very many temptations.
Oh, really?
We found a lot of very friendly people at airports in Texas, and they took us into town and showed us around. And there are a lot of towns in Texas, as there are in Kansas and other plain states, that are isolated from other big cities. Okay. So they're very self-contained. Everything is going on there. All the stores are there, and
you don't leave necessarily.
Yeah, you don't have to go to a big shopping center. It's all. And we had good friends near Fredericksburg and Luckenbach, Texas, and that was a very appealing place.
Well, and that's got to be something similar with motorcycle riding too, is that you kind of, I've heard it explained and it's true because you're exposed more so, right? You're kind of in it as opposed to like watching it through a window. You meet a lot more people. Yeah. And I think you document that pretty well in the book of all the people that you met. Do you have some standouts that strangers that became good friends?
Oh, yeah. I think when you have, the same is true with cars and motorcycles. If you have an interesting motorcycle that's a little unusual or a car, you meet people all the time. I mean, I did a trip across the U.S. from here to California one year in a Model A Ford with my friend Chris Beebe. We did a sort of a Dust Bowl trip.
Oh, sure, yeah. Fitting.
John Steinbeck type trip.
Yeah, grapes of wrath.
And almost every town we stop in, we'd stop in front of a restaurant. Half the restaurant would empty out, and even the cook would be out there looking at our car to see, this is a nice Model A. What are you doing way down here with Texas or with Wisconsin plates?
Yeah.
And So you meet all kinds of people, and if you just pulled up with your average modern sedan, nothing would, people would say, "Oh, a car pulled up."
Yeah.
And,
it's got Wisconsin plates.
Yeah,
and that's probably
Who
about
cares?
It. Yeah.
What are they doing down here?
So then, in the aviation community, it sounds like this Piper Cub was kind of a unique.
Yeah, there are a lot
plane.
of Cub fans, and almost every airport had somebody who had one or two of them in a hangar.
Mm-hmm.
For instance, in Archer City, Texas, we landed there just to get breakfast one morning, and we landed at the small airport in Archer City, which is where Larry McMurtry is from, who wrote Lonesome Dove and all these big selling novels. And we no sooner landed and pulled to a stop than an older couple came in. They're standing under the wing, and they said, the woman said, "It's Graham and Vivian. We're Graham and Vivian Campbell, and we were just praying to God you'd stop here because we saw your beautiful little yellow cub, and we've got 2 cubs in that hangar.
No way.
And you people must be starving. Let's go to breakfast, And
Yeah.
And so they showed us all over town. That happened a lot with that airplane.
Yeah.
And I think if you'd just flown in with a modern, Cessna or Piper or something, people goes, well, there's another plane just landed. But the airplane really drew people in.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds like you really discovered that people are kind of friendly everywhere you go.
Yeah, they were. We had very good luck on the trip. Once or twice we ran into people who were not all that helpful, but
Sure.
It was by far easily the exception. Almost everywhere we went.
Yeah.
Somebody was excited to see a yellow Piper Cub, and they would come over and talk to us and give us a ride to a hotel or motel, and people picked us up in the morning and said, well, what time are you going to I'll pick you up in the morning so you don't have to get a cab.
It's full service, man.
Yeah.
Well, not to spoil it or anything, but can I ask what happened? What became of the Piper Cub?
Well, after we moved back to Wisconsin, we shipped everything back here, and then I flew the plane back.
Okay.
Barb came back flying commercially and had to bring our cat. We had 2 cats at the time and our dog.
Okay, yeah.
And I made a couple van trips with tools and shop gear and motorcycles and so on.
Yeah.
But we wanted to get the Piper Cub back here. And so my friend Pat Donnelly, who I grew up with in Elroy, Wisconsin, he had just gotten his pilot's license. And so he flew out to California commercially and helped me fly the Piper Cub back to Wisconsin.
Oh, cool. Yeah.
And so we made essentially this reverse route back to Wisconsin.
The hockey stick back up north, yeah.
And then we had it here for a couple of years, and we had it in a small hangar about 11 miles from here, a nice little airport. But it's a long winter here, and the airport, it's a grass strip, and it was not always plowed, and our hangar was unheated. And we had bats in the hangar who were piddling on the wings, shall we say, once in a while. So I had the airplane covered with blue tarps, and I said, this is a nice we'd had the airplane restored by then. We restored it after we got back. So it was in really nice shape. And I said, somebody should really own this airplane who has a heated hangar and a nice paved runway so it doesn't have to have mice in it. And so we sold it to a man in Ripon, Wisconsin, who had a nice heated hangar. And about 3 years later, and then Barb and I just rented airplanes for about 10 years.
Cool.
And we recently saw Barb saw it online. You could put in your N number and find out where your airplane is now.
Oh, yeah, the tail number, yeah.
Yeah, it's the tail number. And so she put it in, and our Cub is in Australia now.
Really?
Yeah.
Huh. I have to imagine somebody didn't fly it all the way there.
I don't think so. People ask this, how would anybody fly a Piper Cub to Australia? And I said, it's got a wing tank. Just put more gas. It just needs more gas.
Yeah, right. Yeah, you can really refuel.
No, I'm sure it went into a container somewhere and somebody shipped it.
Yeah. Well, that's got to be cool that it's still being used and appreciated, just like you appreciated it. So.
Well, everything else, for some reason, things I owned seem to go to Australia. I had a Ducati bevel drive 900 Super Sport, 75, I think it was, and that ended up in Australia. So
small world, man.
Yeah, I guess there's a market for. The U.S. got a lot more of these things than everyone else probably at the time.
Yeah.
So this is still the hotbed for finding
either that or it's the home for Egan collectibles. I don't know.
Yeah, that could be.
Super fan out there.
They realize there's somebody who's put way too much money into things and is willing to take a loss.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So, well, again, Landings in America is the name of the book. Mm-hmm. Before we end, just a couple more quick questions. Where can you get the book?
Well, probably it's available online at different places, but I think probably the best bet is just Octane Press in Austin, Texas. They have a website, and you can order it from them.
Very cool.
And other than that, they're very good. They've been putting it out on all kinds of other websites and so on. But I should thank the people at Octane Press. I think they did a beautiful job on this book. And Tom Heffron, who was the art director, brought these photos to life. So a few of them were. There's a photo section in the book, and they were all just snapshots I had taken, and he found ways to clean them up and sharpen them and make them look better than they did when they were just in my scrapbook. So it was nice to see that.
Probably brought you right back to that spot, too.
Yeah,
Probably reignited some memories.
So,
well, just real quick before we end, what else have you been up to? Any more books on the horizon? Any big trips coming up?
I don't know. I would like to take some longer motorcycle trips, but I'm 77 years old, and I don't have any big trips planned right now. I'm pretty happy to be here, and I do a lot of motorcycle riding on the back roads around here.
Yeah.
And I go flying occasionally with friends who are still flying, which is fun.
Yeah.
But I don't know if I've got another book planned or not. I mean, I've got to cool off from this one. It's so nice to be done and and just get up in the morning and go for a motorcycle ride or do some bicycle ride or whatever. Take the dog for a walk.
Yeah, so. Enjoy some retirement.
Yes,
maybe.
Yes.
Well, cool, Peter. Thank you so much for spending some time with us, telling us about landings in America and catching up. And I'm excited to have people dig into it and see what they think. So.
Well, thank you. Thanks for coming up and visiting again. So enjoyed it.
I'm happy to invite myself up again sometime.
Anytime.
So. All right. Thank you, sir.
Sure.
Thanks for listening to Driven to Ride. Interact with us and check out full unedited conversations, photos, interviews, video interviews, plus other goodies on YouTube or Instagram at Driven to Ride Podcast. Or you can check us out at driventoridepodcast.com. And make sure you leave us a rating and review from wherever you get your podcasts, too. If you have an idea for an episode or a guest, or you want to invite us out on an adventure, email us hello@driventoridepodcast.com. Driven to Ride is wholly owned by Flint Rock LLC, made possible with help from Matthew Miles, and written, hosted, and produced by me, Mark Long. We'll see you out there.